Well, thank you very much, Woon, for the kind introduction. A very good morning to all of you, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. We will kick off this morning with hopefully rather optimistic outlook for the region and for the world, namely the green reset. The coronavirus pandemic coupled with, for example, this US-China confrontation have brought about a lot of rather pessimistic outlook for the region and for the world. But is that also an opportunity beckoning in the sense of we could do a reset, a green reset, an innovative reset, a technology-driven reset? Is it possible to do so? And this would, of course, have a profound implication for Malaysia as a developing country. We will start our presentation with Professor Rajack, my good friend and a very eminent economist, previously still with the University of Malaya as the director of the Asia-Europe Institute. But of course, he was equally famous as the Dean of the Faculty of Economics. And he's, of course, also an advisor to our national government as well as to various international institutions. So each speaker would have around 8 minutes to do their presentation. And we will start with Professor Rajack.
Instead of me speaking to present all the slides, in the interest of time, since I'll be speaking only for 8 minutes, I'll skip some slides. But let me first begin by honoring and thanking Tan Sri Michael Yeo, Dato, Muhammad Iqbal, Router, I'm not sure where he's there. Of course, the chair, Dr. Uwai's son, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Given the fact that we have a diverse range of speakers here, all of them eminent, I'll just touch on, the slides are not up there. Initially first, the points I suppose all of us will collectively address, the geopolitical situation, particularly the China containment policies, which I believe began, or at least became visible to me during Barack Obama. And then, of course, the 2022 outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine war. More so, what I think are more significant in terms of what it's causing around the world, the ripples that we're feeling, the supply shortage-driven inflation from the economic sanctions, which to me undermines further the role played by the Bretton Woods institutions that were started in 1944, the IMF and the World Bank. Climate resilience towards green energy, digitalization and digitization. The second point that I mentioned here, largely because if countries are not engaged, if they don't catch the wave, then of course they are likely to be falling under the digital divide, and the consequences of that will be dire. I would not touch on those two because I think in the interest of time, it's better me as an economist focus on issues that we are expecting, especially so now that the Fed Chair Jerome Powell has already announced there will be another interest rate hike, probably from 5.25 to 5.5%. And what that would mean for unemployment, exchange rates, and then I'm not sure whether you're seeing this, and Biden has already mentioned this, that they are actively pursuing industrial policy, which led to UNIDO preparing now, and I'm leading the study for Asia, looking at the new industrial policy in the context of the circumstances that are prevailing now. Let me then again just address what I see are important points in the context of what we will face over the next several years economically. But surely we can't detach geopolitics from it, the increasing isolation of China by the United States, and then in two forms, one of which politically driven by the Indo-Pacific Initiative, which to a large extent is an IR initiative with military and political implications. The second one is trade constraints imposed on China by the US. In this case here, I'm sure you're aware of what happened to Huawei, especially their colleague in Canada. The chip constraint, we no longer have supplies of important chips, either from TSMC or UMC or Vanguard from Taiwan to Chinese companies, and the consequences of that. Economic sanctions against Russia, which to me, collectively, because it also now has implication because Ukraine is also a large exporter of food, including edible oils like rapeseed oil, sunflower oil. What that has done, so we now have a situation instead of sudden rises in demand pushing inflation, we now have a situation where you have supply shortages, disruption of supply chain, especially wheat, edible oils, and then of course the contagion of that on inputs used to produce them. And then of course it's also discouraged because food is an inferior good in economics or a given good where the demand is fairly inelastic over a range of price change. And that actually means that countries have actually started to restrict food exports in order to be more secure. Then, of course, we all know the serious shortages of oil and gas. And it's interesting that the US, Biden has mentioned this. There is now a very strong likelihood what Jeffrey Sachs says is already happening, that is trading oil and gas from Venezuela on high seas are now possibly going to be formalized, which obviously means that the highly oil and gas dependent countries in Europe are probably demanding more supplies of that. Of course, to some extent, a lot of this oil was also going through India and China because they don't have problems in relation to importing oil and gas from Russia. Now, for some reason, Malaysia and some countries in Southeast Asia benefited from the geopolitical issues, with many companies relocating from China to not just Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand to a large extent, to circumvent prohibitions as well as tariff hikes to reach the US. But that's coming down largely because the US economy in the last quarter grew 2%, but it's largely stagnating. What that actually means is that exports to the US are no longer the driver of electronic exports from Malaysia, and therefore you see a gradual decline in current account surpluses, which has got a bearing on exchange rates. I'll come back to that later. Now, I mentioned that I will skip climate change, digitalization, areas where I actually recently produced some books. If anyone is interested, you can, of course, get to that. Now, focusing on the implications of that, I'm not sure if you all are aware of NIRU, non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment. What Milton Friedman mentioned is you should leave it to the markets. So long as inflation is not accelerating, where you have galloping or hyperinflation, then that's the natural rate of unemployment at that time. But what's happening now is there is this obsession by the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, to make sure that inflation falls below 2%. That's because he's fixated with that, and I'm not. And again, if you look at the US economy, the earlier global financial crisis, it is at 5.25% when Ben Bernanke who had replaced Alan Greenspan, he resigned at that time because the US economy imploded at that time. We now have already passed that stage. And because of the fact that despite the announcement the interest rates will be hiked again, the demand for US dollar is falling. I'm not sure whether we are reaching that sort of situation, which means to say people are no longer interested in buying your dollars or saving their money in the banks. So I think we are probably reaching that sort of situation. But this coming in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. and the Ukraine war has shaken the world even further. While the war should never have been allowed, tens of thousands of people have died, huge devastation in building infrastructure, but I think in my focus here, I'll just, instead of talking about more negotiations and so on, talk about why economic sanctions have not in the past worked. Serious shortages in food supply, oil and gas supply, especially to Europe. Germany was dependent on 65% oil and gas from Russia, an affected trade which attracted anti-inflationary monetary interventions in countries such as the US. Britain's interest rate is 5%. Fed interest in the US went up, as the judge mentioned, and it's likely to go up with the announcement that was made by the Fed chair, and which is widely regarded as the prime reason for depreciating currencies earlier, including the ringgit. Rising interest rates have been argued to be the prime cause of growing mortality among SMEs in the US, at high, and including households going bankrupt. And what that actually means is that they become non-performing loans, and banks then go out of business because banks no longer can get the money back. We all know that several banks have already closed down in the US. For now, stagnation has been avoided. Stagnation is that you have high inflation, high unemployment at the same time, and you also avoided a recession because you need to have at least 2 quarters of contraction, and the US grew in the last 1 quarter by 2%. I'll come back to this if you have time, any important questions. I'll just conclude because the time, I suppose, is coming to an end. I see an important point to mention, despite the fact that I did not attempt to touch very much, emergence of a multipolar system with Africa increasingly leaning towards China and Russia, and Asian nations largely taking non-aligned stand. If you look at it, when the Vietnam War was happening, almost everyone in this region was scared about the domino effect. We all ended up joining the US against Vietnam. We felt that this whole area would become red. But it's not the same now. With the exception of Singapore, every other country seems to be neutral on this. Then I see the emergence of dual international currencies. Not that there is a serious attempt to de-dollarize, which many people have mistakenly seen as an attempt. It's an alternative forced upon by the US. If you look at the euro, yes, apart from avoiding wars to many other things, the euro also played the role of removing the unfair advantage the dollar had, and the euro being one of those competing currencies. But the push for having yuan, in particular by the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, as well as South Africa, is largely because there are no other alternatives for these guys. So it's something that I feel is not the same as an attempt seriously targeted at de-dollarizing. Economic planning, especially among trade and FDI-dominated countries, increasingly becoming uncertain. Indeed, you can plan today, in a few months, you'll have to see different, especially countries that are small and highly integrated into the global economy through particularly trade, but also investment. A lot of what we do are reflections. To some extent, although this has become an outmoded statement, when Washington coughs, we get a cold. It's not just Malaysia alone getting the cold. Now, in that sense, it actually has made planning. I see myself being in the economic advisory team advising the PM. It's not easy to plan if you want to have, for example, to reduce the fiscal deficit, for example, to reduce the debt to GDP ratio, and you at the same time want to see that the poor are not getting worse. These are all difficult, especially so when you are in a situation of huge amount of uncertainty. And this also surely threatens to slow down the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 of them that the UN put up in 2016. And because of all these developments, you also see the rise of right-wing ethnopolitics, not just in Malaysia, all over the world. Rising food security problems, quickening the proliferation of Industrial Revolution 4.0 technologies, and an emphasis on raising self-sufficiency in food production. Of course, these are all things suddenly emerging, even though Malaysia has had a problem with food trade imbalance from 1989. We've had chronic imbalance in relation to imports soaring over exports. what that actually means is that this is a problem that started from 1989. Till today, it's only worsening. So I hope something more drastic takes place, although these are things that have been handled better, say, by Indonesia and Thailand. I think I should stop now. And of course, if there are any interest, me, an academic, and of course, an economist, I'm happy to say or reply your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Professor Rajarasya, who gave us a very extensive background on not only the socio-economic, but also the geopolitical developments, the latest developments in the region and in the world. And our second speaker would be from the banking technology industry. And well, he is the CEO of Banking Technologies Asia, which is a technology solution and venture capital organization. And let us welcome Mr. Daniel Mankani.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I'm going to give you a very different perspective about practically everything. First of all, I think everybody should get away from the scarcity, fear-based mindset. What we have been witnessing all along is everything is being driven around by that fear and cognitive dissonance that lies in society. There are trends out there and there are cycles, and these trends and these cycles, they will continue, or they should continue in a proper manner, because humans and our behaviors and our patterns all have an inherent type of display of how we behave at extremes. And most of these trends and cycles, they happen due to time series, they happen to correct imbalances in the economy, and they occur at regular time frames. But at this moment, over the last many years, government intervention in practically everything, integration of policies written by consultants, drive decisions for everyone, for every individual and for every government. And now we are calling out the Great Reset. But let's look back at where we are and how we've got here. It's just because of this man. The policies, the economic policies that everybody is following is because of this man. And you can look from his title over there. He promotes government intervention. He promotes intervention in practically every society, practically in every manner that we do things. In 1998, I was trading, and I was part of the LTCM blow-up. I was also very young when I was witnessing the collapse of the Soviet Union. At that time, the bailout was $3 billion. That was what it is, $3 billion. Then comes the dot-com, then comes the war, and then 2008. In 2008, a major shift happened. It happened because, for some reason, we believe that we can actually create growth by printing and printing and printing and printing. And all of that print will never be able to deliver growth. It will never be able to deliver growth. So, to solve one problem, we do something else. To solve one problem, we do something else. So we start off with cash for clunkers, then we start off with student loans. And when you want to know about student loans, it's a blow-up. $40,000 is what's the cost of debt for a student today in the United States. and they can't find jobs. Because the people who want jobs, they want to have experience. I mean, they look for people with experience. Now, the guy, he needs to have experience or he needs to have a job. And most of the people who are very successful actually don't have any college education or they didn't have any degrees. That's the fact. So it's a scarcity mindset again, lowering of education standards so that we have more graduates, and then because we have more graduates, we will create a higher income. It didn't work. And we went down one by one. But you have to understand there's an equilibrium out there, and these things will happen. And that's what we're talking about today of the Great Reset. This is corruptive finance. This is what it is. It's the alchemist. Today, all battles of everything and all directions of everything is perception management. And it's been fought out on the social media. Social media has been used for policy approvals, to drive that scarcity mindset, to get that approval factor. And COVID is an example of it. People were told, you're sick, but there are no symptoms. People accepted it. And because of COVID, the blow up in the debt that has really occurred, for 40 years or whatever you could say, the amount of debt that the United States had, it practically doubled in this last 2 to 3 years. And that debt is unpayable, just unpayable. Today, when you talk about green energy, we really have to get away from that scarcity mindset. We really have to get away from that cognitive dissonance. If you take any of these policies, goal zero, carbon credits, whatever you want to take these policies and you go and look at them, and you really go and look at them deep, you will find that they cannot hold the water. ESG is not applicable to China. Blackstone just basically came out recently and said, the CEO just came out recently and he was exposed saying, it was basically to create a behavioral change in people. Now, the scarcity mindset of you saying there's not enough food out there, I would tell you that the last couple of years, we've been shutting down farms in the Netherlands and in other parts of Europe. Why? Because of the carbon footprint. You call it the carbon footprint. Then the carbon footprint, if there are 3 times more carbon footprint on a solar panel, according to the IPCC. Solar and wind is inefficient if you compare it to coal. We know that we are beyond the time of peak energy. The cheap energy is out. But again, we have to get away from that scarcity mindset and look at everything that is in the right manner. Today, and I have brought up this for many years, and the last time I spoke about high debts, stagnating economy, and a world war. I still hold true to that, and this is where we are now, because there is no way out of this. And how it happens, I wouldn't be able to tell, but there is an implosion in the West, for sure. And that's why we see the participants of the countries who are going to be involved, they are citizens leaving, willing to pay high premiums, coming into places like Singapore raising up 60%, premium for a foreigner buy-in. All of that is all interconnected. There's a blowout on pension funds. All the pension funds are into one single game. Everybody is buying stuff which is very, very, very concentrated in few particular stocks. But the growth is not infinite. There's always going to be corrections, and there's always going to be destructions. And those destructions have to really occur, because if they don't, you just kick the can down the road. And you've been kicking the can down the road for a very long period of time. Now let's look at where we are. So we're going to have a crisis. And we put up a report last week that we are there. Maybe it begins in a week, because when I look at my charts, I look at the stock market, I look at all the other correlated markets. We had one leg down, We had a pullback, and that pullback is here now. The NASDAQ is up 60% over the last 6 to 7 months. That is what I call leg 2. And then from there, you go leg 3 and you go lower. And you're going 60 to 70% down on the financial markets. Every war is a financial war. Now let's look at when that really happens, how it's going to happen. Pension funds blow up. The governments have allowed the crypto to go out there and do all kinds of things and talking about open finance and open networks, but their financial networks are all very insecure. People's, against cognitive ideas, there's a cognitive dissonance out there. That's why you have a lot of scams going out there. People don't really realize what's really going on. Their doors are not locked. And the integration of all of that when that crisis occurs, and in order to stable off a civil unrest type of situation, when people find out that their pension funds don't have any money in there, their reserves are not really there, nothing is really there. To stifle all of that off, the governments are now trying to integrate something and bring it out called the CBDCs. But what's going to happen with that? One account has blown up on one side, and the other side you create another set of account. What's going to happen with that? You're going to have, again, massive inflation because it's just not real money. Money is a financial, it's a psychology if you think about it. What is money? Money is a psychology, a means of transaction, but it is all based on credibility. The minute that credibility goes away, that money doesn't exist. Now with this CBDC, the other thing that you're going to see that the global agenda is basically to create a dystopian society. So the CBDC will be integrated with global health, carbon, goal zero, and all of that. Is that the society that you want? I don't think so. On the geopolitical side of things, if you think about if there's a coming war in the South China Sea, I don't think that is also going to happen. Because the partners involved in that war are actually playing with each other on both sides. So if you look at India, it's in the group, all the allies are now playing exercises in the South China Sea. And they've been starting it up, and you have other types of people on the social media network showing up fake, blown up warships and all of that stuff, because it is all about building consent. But if you look at India, it's only going where its bread is buttered. But if you look at India, it's on this side with these guys, but on the other side of other things, it is somewhere else. The Western society is in deep trouble. It's in deep trouble. Socialization, this type of CBDCs and integrating with global health and all of that, this is forced socialization on the world. It's not good. That socialization didn't work out for Europe. It didn't work out for Europe. So you are going to have a situation where there's going to be a massive blow up. And people have to wake up to their self-individual sovereignty, who they are, because your politicians are just your representatives. And countries have to wake up to who they are. And they have to look at their own interest, their own country's interest. So that's what I wanted to put across. The other thing I wanted to say is Malaysia is a very, 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 very interesting place. And what has really happened with Malaysia has also been very, 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 very interesting. The way it has happened has been very interesting. So we were watching the 97, 98 crisis. I sold the KLCI down to 350 from 1400 at that time. I was on the short side. And I got out at 330 because I didn't know it was the bottom, but I had a client who went reverse. So I said, this is about it, because he was buying all the way down. And you had the reformist movement. You had the current prime minister prosecuted, and all kinds of things happened. Then you had one prime minister, then Dr. Mahathir left 2003. then Badawi came in. He had some great ideas about agropreneurship, about building the food security of the country. I think those are some excellent ideas. And then you went on from there. But when you look at the whole place where we are today, there are significant rewards coming to Malaysia for all the other things that has happened, because 20 years over of stagnation will result in an economic revival. And that stagnation has been there for 20 over years, since that 97, 98 crisis. The market has not really moved in the benefit of the people. It hasn't. But now it's all ready. And over the next 1 year, you probably will see a couple of very interesting policy changes. I would think HSR would be one of them. I would think KLCC2, which is the redevelopment plan for Kampong Baru, would be the second one. And I would think relaxation of the immigration policies. And when these three things happen, there's going to be a massive wealth-creating effect. The HSR is very, very important, because you have to understand the most busiest route between two countries is Singapore and Malaysia. The number of flights between Singapore and Malaysia are the highest in number anywhere in the world. And when that HSR comes in, it really drives growth towards Malaysia. Singapore, on the other hand, has benefited over the last 20 years with cheap labor because of racial issues or whatever, so people went to Singapore to find jobs. For cheap resources, all of that is going to be taken away, because in Malaysia now, with that growth, it will basically, Singapore probably stagnates, Malaysia starts to rally, is my view. Just like what happened to Hong Kong and China. So Malaysia was always the back hinterland for Singapore. The government is looking at all the benefits that how Singapore turned around or how Dubai turned around, and some of those policies, when they come here, it will be very, very nice. Now, when it comes to the property perspective, because I run a property fund and I run an investment fund on the derivative side as well, on the property perspective, actually every property out there is undervalued. I'll give you an example. I bought an apartment in 2004, December. I paid 700 ringgits for it. The price at that time was $3.80 to the ringgit. That property today will probably sell for $8.50. A bag of cement used to be like $10.50, and now today it's like 23 bucks. You look at the same thing with steel, you look at the same thing with everything else. So all of those properties are going to actually double in 5 years. And I'm telling you that because I have traded these markets for a very long period of time. Because
Daniel,
when you have stagnation...
Daniel, you need to wrap it up in,
okay,
let's say,
when
2
you have
minutes.
stagnation, and that stagnation goes on for a long period of time, when it picks up with great momentum. So I conclude my talk about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Daniel, for your understanding. Daniel would like us to get away from, what is this, scarcity mindset, right? And he gave us some very real-life examples of how we could do that. Next, we welcome Dato Dr. Vaseehar Hassan Abdul Razack, who is an Executive Vice Chairman of the organizer KSI, as well as a Director of Bank Rakyat.
Thank you, Dr. Picking on what Daniel had said earlier, I mean, he had some very valid points, but the title itself is a very vast, wide title, because we are talking about the Green Reset, Future Ready Asia, and addressing geostrategic and global political challenges and shifts to digital, green, and innovation-led growth. So, the global political challenges itself is a topic which I think is something that is blocking the rest of the thing, our growth in digital, green, and innovation, because of the geopolitical situation that we are currently facing. So a lot of what is happening in the world is psychological. The psychological fear of the United States, which is the world's leading economy, losing its predominance, which it has enjoyed for a long, long time. And the emerging economies or the almost closing gap, China, which aspires to be the global leader and has its ambition to overtake US. So there is a major psychological warfare going between the two countries. And of course, over the years, the US was helping China to grow by exporting a lot of their industries to China for its cheap labor. And when the country has grown and become a challenge, now they want to reverse that policy, and it may be a little bit difficult and challenging and too late to reverse that. And a lot of European countries have also done that, except for, I think, you can count Germany, Netherlands, and some of the Scandinavian countries, which kept many of their industries within themselves and were very careful in exporting to China. But the rest of the world was very happily enjoying the cheap labor. And now China, we have helped to China to grow, and then now we want to challenge their leadership in the world, and that is going to be difficult. And because of that, the world, which has to be a collaborative world for economic development, has become a confrontational world. And that is creating a lot of issues for many of the countries. And caught between these two giants, China on one side and the US on the other side, are smaller nations like ours, ASEAN. Many of the ASEAN countries are very small, and we are dependent on the collaboration between US and China. We cannot say that we want to shift all our, what I will call, all our eggs to either China or US. We have to be mindful that we need both, because both are very important markets for us. We can't take sides in the whatever psychological warfare that is going on. And because of this, our targets to digitalization, green innovation, and will be taking a little bit of a back step because everybody is focusing on the psychological war. And what is the solution to this is the countries who are gigantic and trying to outmaneuver one another must come to the drawing table and sit and discuss how to have a collaboration. And that is very challenging because you have already created a kind of an environment where one country thinks that they are bigger than the other. And a lot of psychological issues happen because there is human beings by nature are irrational in their behavior. As much as we want to imagine that we take rational decisions, but I think most of the decisions made by leaders are irrational and driven by their own interests. This is proven not only in political, but also in economic and business sectors. Even that is one of the reasons why mergers and acquisitions fail. 70% of the time they fail because it's driven by the desire of the CEO of the company, organization which wants to acquire for his own reasons rather than the so-called synergy. So all these factors are creating problems for the world, and we have also tempered for a long time with the supply and demand side. For example, artificially keeping the interest rates too low for a long time until we had almost zero interest rates for many, many years. And then suddenly the lid has burst open and the interest rates are going up. And here we see that because of that, other countries are having a problem. And where do we stand in Malaysia? While the US has moved its interest rates to 5.25, we are keeping it at around 3%. And then the differential between the two is going to create an economic problem. So everything becomes a kind of a double-edged weapon. If you temper with one, you get a problem on the other side. And if you therefore, what we need is a kind of economic freedom. We talk about economic freedom, but rarely it is done because political interference is become very wide and very open in the recent years compared to earlier years. Of course, Daniel was critical of Keynes. It was applicable at that point of time when after the World War, what he recommended was full employment and government intervention to put the economy back on track. But that has been taken too far by some countries, and that's where the problem arises. So what I would suggest is there is no solution to the warfare that is going on a psychological basis, and there is going to be disruption to many countries because of this what I would call the warfare that is going on. And then this is creating a supply demand, and some of the countries want to block China by not supplying some of the key ingredients and vice versa. So we are looking at a scenario of a very difficult situation.
In this video, I am talking about
everybody gets hurt.
say across the street, across the road, will look significantly photo area and crop that the field. It shall worry about in a shot and the line tinged or the balance the highlights and shadow or object that you
conclude my opinion on.
That's exactly on time. Thank you very much. I think Dato gave us some insights as to how sometimes the psychological aspects of things could affect world events. Next, we will have Professor Dato Dr. Tin Yu Sin, JP, my very good friend for a number of years. And he has an extensive list of qualifications which you could see in your handouts there. And I think he will share with us some of his regional perspectives. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Dr. O is my good friend for many years. I think I know him since 2006, if I'm not wrong, so about 17 years already. First time I met him at Sabah Day. So he was sharing a talk for me on this, I think the merger and the innovation ideas, something like that. Okay, today I'm going to talk about this, what I call green technology or green economics. So this first industrial revolution, the production factor is the steam engine. Then for the second industrial revolution, the production factor is the petrol. And for this third industrial revolution, this production factor still the petrol. And coming to this fourth industrial generation, which is right now, this production factor is the big data, which is not energy related. The first three industrial revolutions, everything is to do with the energy or fuel or something like that. But for this what I call this fourth industrial revolution, is only based on this what I call big data. I'm going to touch on the future, the fifth industrial revolution, what is the production factor? And then what is the future economic system after this digital economic? So I will talk later. If I talk now, nobody will listen to me already. Okay, so this digital economic, or what I call, is driven by these digital technologies. What is digital technologies? It covers 5G or 6G is coming, and then this what I call this big data, internet, what I call cloud computing, AI, artificial intelligence. All these are considered digital technologies, which is what is the production factors of what I call digital economics. So, and what is this to do with our green technologies, or what I call the green economics, which I assume, based on my theoretical assumption, the next economic system will be our green economics. Because digital economics is important for the development or social development or economic development of a country, which can make a country to develop faster by compared with the traditional way. Traditional way, normally you go by what? You go by the what I call manufacturing. Normally you go by the imitation. You try to copy from people, then you go for the improvement. After that, you go for innovation and invention. By using these digital technologies, you can cut short all these stages of development. You can go faster. This is digital economy to me is more something to do with what I call this economic development. But economic development alone, without this what I call sustainability, is no good. Just like we got a lot of money, but we don't have help, then we have to go to help. So it's no point. So you got money, but you cannot enjoy your life because you got no help. Recently, a young minister just passed away. So he's a very polite, very hardworking minister. So he got the power, but does not have the help. So for us also the same. A country can have economic development, or the work, the economic development can be very good, but whether it's sustainable or not. So for a country or for the world to be able to sustainable, we must take care of the green technology or green economics. So I think the future next economic system to come should be based on green economic. So what is what I call green technologies? Green technology is something to do with what? Alternative form of energy, like solar power, the wind power, the what I call the wave power, use the sea water to generate electricity, all these things. And then you can use electric vehicles, all these things are considered something to do with the green technologies. And how to make use of the ICT to really sort of produce certain things with less carbon emission to our environment. I think that is very important because now people are talking about how to cut down the carbon emission. So China also, they got commitment, because China right now is the largest world producer for carbon emission. They are the world largest manufacturing countries in the world, but they're also the largest producers of carbon emission in the world. So they have a commitment to sort of achieve new carbon neutrality in 2060. So I think this is very important. These are great contributions to mankind, and because you know that this carbon emissions problem is a very big problem because our ozone layer, there's a big hole in I think at the northern pole there. So when the hole is getting bigger, the ozone layer is depleting itself. So I think the what called ultraviolet will just we have this sort of greenhouse effect. So the whole world will be destroyed slowly. So I think this what I call green environment is very important. So how to achieve this green environment? I think everybody got a role to play. The government is very important. Government should sort of give a tax incentive for those companies who really can cut down the carbon emission per year, give them the tax incentive. And then even those investor or bankers, investor also must really invest in those green related projects They can really sort of cut down the carbon emissions. And then also, bankers are very important because they're the goalkeepers for any project. Any people want to implement any project must go to the bank. Our Dato, you are the goalkeeper for this green project. So now bank also, they are very concerned if you are not complying to ESG or this SDG, the bank is not going to finance your project. So I think for this way, you really can cut down the carbon emission and then you can achieve the green effect. That's why I say the future economic system should be green economic because that should be the ultimate, what I call the economic system that we should really aspire to because without, what I call, actually in China, more than 2,500 years ago, 2,600 years ago, China has been talking about how to achieve harmonious coexistence between the environment and the humankind. So I think in this new century or anything, so really this Chinese concept of 天人合一, what we call the how to achieve harmonious coexistence between the environment and the human being really come into the actual realization. This is very important because China in 2005, they really got this sort of concept of how to, they say, let the human, how to harmoniously coexist with our environment so that it will not really destroy environment. Now because of the rapid, what I call this modernization of a country, it will sort of produce a lot of carbon emission because manufacturing, you produce a lot of carbon emission. That's why China, why they are the largest world producer, because they are the largest manufacturing base in the world. That's why China now is really working very hard to use what I call solar power to generate their electricity and also try to produce a lot of these electric vehicles. They are the world largest electric vehicles producer now. I think they're also the world largest exporter for electric vehicles. So I think this effort is very important. Other countries also must follow because this green environment is the common heritage of all humankind. Every country must play its role. China's playing role is not good enough because China is only part of the world. So every country, even Malaysia or any countries also must really look into it. That's why I think, so these green technologies and green economics should be the next, what I call, fifth industry revolution, just like I mentioned, is based on what? Green technologies. It's driven by green technology. That means you have to use an alternative form of energies. So this one will be the fifth industry revolution. I think will happen in another maybe 10 to 15 years. So that's why I think more people become more aware of the importance of environment. So I think the investor, the bankers, all this can play a good, very important role. And then the government also can play a role. And even the public also, we must always caution people how to cut down the carbon emissions. Even for us, public, we try not to use so much warm water can help the country to cut down carbon emission already because there's many things we can do also, not only the government, the world bodies, everybody can play its role. So I think it's very important. Without a green environment, nobody can survive. This is for sure. So that's why I think these green technologies and green economy will be the future thing, the future trend of our country, of the world. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you indeed, Dr. Chin Yu Sin, for giving us glimpses of green future as well as the fourth industrial revolution. We have, half an hour for question and answer. I would like to welcome all of you to raise your questions. There are microphones scattered around the room. I can see at least 3 of them, maybe even 4. If you have questions, please do go to the microphones. Perhaps you could first briefly introduce yourself and then the panelists to whom the question is directed, and then your question. So yourself, the panelists, and then the question. Any Any taker? Anybody? If not, well, this is the, okay. Tan Sri Rainer Althoff, formerly of Siemens.
So thank you so much. Can you hear me? Thank you so much for all these panel discussions. And I have one question regarding China. Professor Chin, he made a statement. That was not your statement. Regarding China and its carbon footprint. De facto, China has the worst carbon footprint in the world. Why to blame China? We need solutions. Germany's trade partner number one is China. US-America's trade partner number one is China. So the solution is very easy. Don't order anything in China anymore. Remove the production place from China back home. Immediately 50% of the carbon footprint reduced in China. Thank you.
Tan Sri, you are right. Actually, you talk about the cumulative kind of carbon emissions. It's not China. It's European countries. Because European countries and US, they are the one more advanced than China, previously lah. But now the West only talk about the right now. Of course, right now China, because all the manufacturing base all shift to China. That's why China had to suffer. But China now, after they achieve the what I call the first stage of manufacturing, they try to cut down on the labor-intensive industry. They want to go up the value chain already. They go for the more high-tech kind of what I call manufacturing or production. So now, in a way, they can cut down their manufacturing base already. The manufacturers, these manufacturing companies. So I think some of the more what you call polluted industry, they also try to shift to the inner areas, not the coastal area already. I think they are doing all these things. So I think that's why the West only look at the present, because you talk about cumulative kind of what I call this carbon emission. The Europeans was number one. Then US, because all these countries, they what I call modernize their country or what I call industrialize the country much earlier than China. China only start to really industrialize only after 1978 until now it's only 45 years only. So that's why you talk about now, India also another country that with a lot of carbon emission, Russia also. So because of this development thing, so I think another thing, all the countries should really look at this what I call how to achieve this green total factor productivity. That is very important. That means when you develop a country, but not only look at the economic performance, but also look at what I call how to protect your eco-environmental protection. That's very important. That means you must achieve a balance between the economic development and the economic and the environmental protection. I think that should be the future. That's why I'm talking about this green economy, because in future, the green economy, you will only not look at the economic development, you also look at the environmental protection. These two must come together. You just talk about the economic development, there will be a lot of carbon emission, because when you just develop a country, you don't care what sort of industry you're just doing, you just want to get the industry started. Even Malaysia, we got the liners also, all these things. So we only think of the economic development. Must also consider the damage to environment. That's why in future, I think everybody will be more conscious of this environmental protection already. Thank you very much.
I think Professor Raja Rasya was have something to add.
I just wanted to share some information, having had refereed two books. One of them is Greening Capitalism by John Matthews, Stanford University Press, 2015. You can read that. Second by the same guy, forthcoming from Oxford University Press on the same topic. China was, to a large extent, a huge polluter. The environment being a global common. Whatever happens around the world will be shared by everybody else. That's the argument Garrett Hardin came up with. But the important thing here is those things have drastically fallen. If you look at the smart cities, whether it's in Shenzhen or whether it's in Beijing or Tianjin or Shanghai, there's a significant decline in that sort of pollution, and much of this is monitored from satellites. The hundreds of thousands of CCTVs right up in operating from satellites that do planning and monitoring of these things. So if you look at the latest statistics, although of course China has a carbon net zero target of 2060, it's still really doing really well. So my encouragement is go and read these more recent books. You'll see that there have been substantial changes of late. Thank you.
Yeah, please, Daniel. I think you have, you have only.
I just want to give a different perspective to this. I think you could complain and you could say the consumption on the other side is demanding or requiring me to do so much, and that's why I'm getting more emissions. You could say that as well, because you are, in the Western countries, you are requiring all of that production to happen, and then you could say that other person is partially to blame. But I personally think that you should balance it out. Every country should be responsible for their stuff that they need, because when supply chains break down, when scarcity hits, when trade sanctions hit, for example, in Malaysia, you may not even find light bulbs if you need light bulbs. Why is that situation like this? I mean, you should be self-sufficient to a certain extent. If you're looking at price differentiating factor, I think that shouldn't be that way. If I go to Eastern Europe today and I go to many places and I see the whole factories that used to be there, so many people used to work there, they've all lost their jobs. So the model of being a factory to the world is not sustainable in the longer run. It's not sustainable in the longer run. That's what I think. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Yes. Again, briefly introduce yourself. You would like to direct a question to which panelist, and then the question itself. So there are 4 mics.
Okay, good morning. I'm Stephen Lai. I'm from Penang. I just came back from China, Hong Kong, and Bangkok after 3 weeks there, right? And I like Daniel. He's very optimistic about Malaysia, and I share some of his optimism. I came back to China and then went to Penang airport. There's broken escalators, dirty airport, as well as unfriendly, staff for the custom, compared to Thailand, Hong Kong, and China. And despite that, I share your optimism about the future of Malaysia. Since Daniel, you are involved in the banking technology, which I've been involved in many years as well in Singapore, I want you to make a comment about what is the state of the art of the banking solutions systems in Malaysia. They are still using AS400 COBOL systems, and the ATM machine always broke down, issue of cybersecurity. So can you please make some comment about the banking technology in Malaysia? How can we improve on that? Thank you.
I think, first of all, about your escalators and all of that, I think all of that will probably be addressed in time. We just came down from after a lockdown. A lot of parts, a lot of things. I see it, I suffer it myself, but I think those problems exist everywhere else at the same time. When it comes to the banking systems and comes to the way the whole open finance network and everything that they are planning to do, I really don't see what's the value in all of this, because I don't really see there's any new innovation. I see the opening of the networks. If you talk about, I personally feel most of the innovative changes that we have seen over the last hundreds of years probably maxed out in the year 1990. I have an article about that when innovation really ended. And after that, whatever I'm seeing, it is all repackaged. What is the new innovation? There is some efficiency in some places. There is some processes getting better in some places. If you integrate artificial intelligence, for that matter, it's not intelligent. It doesn't have any emotion or any type of intelligence in that nature. It is a program that does certain things with a certain programming. And if you tell that program, do this, and if this thing happens, do this, it works. But you have to also understand, programs,
You know, for example, in the financial markets, a lot of people use bots. Today, when you look at the S&P 500, there's a volume of about 10 points move, in 20 points move, you got 1 million and 1.5 million contracts per day. It makes me like crazy what's going on here. And the largest fund out there is running by Quantum Citadel. Citadel runs lots of bots. And they all go there and they munch all these points. Every day they're just munching the points. But you have to understand there is no holy grail. Systems, whatever type of system, you have to look at the end goal of your value creation. What value are you trying to create? Now, for example, sometimes certain people may not like that automation that is happening all over the place. But because there is an agenda, a bigger agenda, so we do the integrations. Why does the central bank want to become a bank? Why does the central bank want to become a bank? Is the current banking system bad? I don't think so. So you look at what is the open finance network that we're talking about. What is that open finance network? Okay, but what is new in there? There's nothing new in there. The way I see it, there's nothing new in there. There's nothing broken for us to fix. Everything is functioning in the right manner. Okay, the debit card system, okay, the debit card system is there. Or the payment system is there. It's always been there. It's just, you have to evolve. Your computers have to evolve. Your processing has to evolve. Your performance has to evolve. But you have to focus on value creation in the end of the day, and that value is to the consumer, to the customer. But your margins are being squeezed. Your services are probably getting worse off. You are facing new challenges. There's more fraud occurring now. So we have to weigh the pros and cons in all of that, you know. And as the technology is concerned, technology is a very simple aspect. It's a very simple aspect. The whole process is very simple. We just confuse the thing. And this is what the internet guys like to do. They like to do that all the time. I mean, look at where's the autonomous driving capability of Tesla. For the many years, he's just been pushing it and pimping it. Or you take what is happening with Meta. Meta just announced last night they got 3 billion new users in a month, or 3 billion users were active on the platform. But their world doesn't have 30 billion people. 60% of the internet traffic is now bots, run by government agencies, run by many people trying to do perception management. So what type of world we are really living in? We're losing our cognitive function. That is what I'm trying to say. You walk down the street, you see everybody taking pictures, not really enjoying this in the nature or the environment. They're just taking pictures to post to friends who don't really exist. They're no friends. So it's a strange world we live in. Very strange. Have I answered your question?
Well,
thank you.
You need to create values for your customers. Dato Vaseehar, you have something to add? Also a prominent banker.
The problem in technology is, of course, we have very advanced technology in banking, but there is, I feel in my own experience, the gap is between the staff who are not adequately trained to use the technology, and the available technology may be there, but if you do not train your staff and make them competent to use the technology, then it's no use investing so much on the technology. Second problem I have in my own experience seen is that there is also the big gap between what the customer wants and what the bankers provide as a solution to technology. And if you go in and try to do some of the online transactions, you can see how frustrating it could be, because you are taken for a ride, including, I mean, not only the technology in banking, try to book some of the things online, you know, whether it's air tickets or this and that. You will find that it takes you sometimes in a very frustrating way, and it's not as easy as the technology claims to be. There is there, but what we want, what the customers want, and what is available, there is a big gap. Secondly, the people who are involved in the technology are not adequately trained to serve the customers. This is the big frustration I think I find in my own experience.
I cannot agree more with Dato Vaseehar. Sometimes when I use some of the websites of some of the banks of which I'm a customer, I would feel like, well, number one, I'm taking an exam. It's like back in university days when you are taking I don't know how to put it, you're taking an exam online. And then the other thing is, of course, you feel like you are a guinea pig, you are being experimented upon because the complexity as to how to approach your banking needs is simply tremendous. But let's see whether Dr. Chin could help us resolve some of this.
I think basically banking, what they want to do is try to give more protections to customers. That's why they always try to upgrade their system. And whenever they want to upgrade the system, they come up with the new features, try to protect the customers. So some of the technology, maybe to a lot of lay people, laymen, they find it difficult to really come sort of, don't know how to use it. Most of the time they go to the bank to ask for assistance. I think in a way it's good for the customer because always they upgrade certain feature is give you more protection so that your money will not be scammed or will not be sort of cheated by people or something like that. So I think this one we have to do, we have to live with it because it's more for our own protection. This is one thing. Another thing I want to touch on is this pandemic actually also really can sort of make our technology to develop faster. Because of this pandemic, a lot of things cannot be done what I call face-to-face. That's why you have to be online. Even banking system also, I think not because of pandemic, I don't think the digital banking thing will come in so fast. If not because of pandemic, I think digital banking, the development of digital banking will not be as developed right now. I mean, not only in Malaysia, in other countries like China is more developed, even Hong Kong, these are Singapore, these countries. So I think with this, what I call pandemic, you got this sort of what I call crisis, but at the same time also there's opportunity to let this what I call ICT to develop faster or digital economy to develop faster. Because there's always pros and cons there, you see. So that's why this what I call pandemic is a good time for this country to reset their what I call their mind. So that what I call the green reset. When they, when during this pandemic, the time, the what I call the emission, carbon emission reduced by 8%, during the year, because of, the what I call this flight also reduced. Not many people, many people cannot go overseas at the time, you see. So the manufacturing base also, a lot of manufacturing company also have to close down. So I think, and then the vehicle also, less vehicle on the road because lockdown, you see, you can't really travel freely. During the time, already, the carbon emission reduced by 8%. But this one is no good for our economic development. The only thing is for us to really try to reset that's why I call green reset. That means during this sort of period, you need to think of future. That's why I'm thinking that the future should go for the what I call green economic. We develop a country, we cannot at the expense of our environment. We need the economic development to let our peoples have this employment and to let the country to become more prosperous, all these things. But at the same time, you must think of sustainability. Just like a company, when you're making money, no point you make 1 million today, this month, then next month you got zero. Or another few more months you get zero. That's not sustainable. True or not? When you got 1 million, maybe you spend all the money, and after that you got no more money. But for a country also same. If the world is not sustainable, there's no point for you to keep on developing. At the end of the day, the whole world just perish just like that. Just like when nuclear bomb, when this nuclear war happened, everything will be gone. Just like, this one is same like also when the ozone layer is getting depleted more and more seriously, the ultraviolet directly hit on our Earth, the whole world will be gone. There will be a greenhouse effect. That's why I think you think of the future development, you must really rethink what we want really. You want 100% economic development, 0% environment protection, or you want 70% economic development, 30% economic environment protection, or 50% economic development, 50% what I call environment protection. There's a balance. In economics, everything there must have balance. There's no such thing as 100% good or 100% bad one. So you must think of balance, how to balance your economic development and your environmental protection. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed. Any other question? We have 4 microphones scattered around the room. Dato, yeah.
While waiting for the questions, I thought after Professor Chin made the comment about sustainability, you see, if we want to be sustainable, if we want sustainability, then we also cannot aspire for 8% growth per annum. It has to be compromised as well. We have to look at some of the Gandhian principles of, do we really need to grow at breakneck speed because we want to have a high quality of life because of the wealth? And then on the other hand, you want a green environment. They are conflicting. When the whole world population is decreasing everywhere, except in a few countries in the world, everywhere else the population is decreasing. So even a zero growth means a real growth because your population the per capita is reducing. So we should also aspire not to have neck-breaking growth. If China grows at 8 or 9% and there is a 2% drop because of various issues, the whole world says, oh, because of China, the growth, the entire world wants to slow down. We also have to slow down because if you want sustainability and green environment, it cannot be compatible with 8%, 9% growth. So that has to be a compromise there as well.
Oh, that's a really refreshing perspective. Now, I would like to turn once again to Professor Rajarasya. Now, Professor Rajarasya, you have been a very prominent economist for many years, having done a lot of case studies from around the world and so on. I would like you to focus on what are some of the pitfalls which you think Malaysia could avoid, hopefully avoid, as we, move forward in our nation's journey of development here.
Thank you, Dr. Oi. Let me mention in the context of Malaysia and the way the discussion has evolved, because most of the time we're not really dealing extensively in a holistic way the main topic of green reset. Now, the last point that I heard was there must be a balance in growth, starting from our engineering professor and of course, the Bank Rakyat director. I think to some extent this has always been said, not just by Mahatma Gandhi, but hardly followed. Even in economics, we make the point that you should not have overheating. We make the point, although of course I am not a believer in the neoclassical construct called potential GDP, because they make the point that real GDP cannot exceed potential GDP because potential GDP is measured by what the economy can take. The reason why I say I don't believe in it is because Bob Lucas, the 2004 Nobel laureate, he used to say that the Koreans were lying statistics. Because the Republic of Korea grew on average over 10% per annum from 1970 to the time Park Geun-hye, the president, was shot dead by a security guard. But to me, that wasn't really the case because it was not, to me, modeled correctly. Now, if we come back to that, now I see a parallel now with Malaysia. We all often thought that Malaysia had its golden years of growth from 1990 to 97, because on average, Malaysia grew by 9%, over 9%. If you go and look at it, and the ringgit rose to 2 ringgit and 40 cents before it crashed after the contagion that started from the collapse of the baht. Of course, Soros was only connected with the baht crash, no clear evidence that he was involved in the case of the Malaysian ringgit. Although, of course, the fact that these currencies were tied in some ways, it had some sort of a bearing from there. But let me mention that Malaysia was seriously overheating. If you've been in Malaysia, you will know that we had infrastructure bottlenecks, we had to create independent power plants, all sorts of things, because we did not have the supply to support the kind of demand that was emerging. That was a consequence, even though between 1990 to 97, we had a chronic deficit, chronic balance of payment deficit. It should have reflected, translated into the ringgit falling. It did not, because we had a strong capital account. Foreign direct investment and portfolio equity investment were flowing into the whole of Southeast Asia to the extent that it actually moved ringgit high. Not that we are economically strong. To me, those were lost years. Although, of course, our former Prime Minister glorifies himself for those growth rates. But in reality, I do not think that is what we call overheating, in a way where factors drove GDP growth rather than technical change. Now, the clear example you can see, it actually undermined and destroyed food. Food imports became so cheap, starting from that trigger till today, food is a problem because we have continued to see the deficit growing, that gap growing, despite lots of calls to new agricultural policy, even the second new agricultural policy, none of them have reversed that trend. Now, this is a case, I take it there that we need to be concerned about these things. It's just like we must recognize that in Malaysia, from 1990 to 2022, where we have figures, the debt to GDP ratio, even though some years it improved, there has been a trend upwards, which is why we suddenly impose a Fiscal Responsibility Act measure to say we cannot exceed 50%, but now it's 65% because it continues to soar. That's one. Second, the fiscal deficit itself, in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, we already made it clear it should not exceed 3%. It's over 6% now. It's over 6% now. Now, if we are serious about these things, we have to look at what we are spending money on, the government is spending money on. A lot of it, you'll see, don't make any sense to me, a lot of it. Of course, I being in the Economic Advisory Board, we have the Official Secrets Act, many of which I cannot really reveal. I have spoken to many banks, especially Bursa and the banks, even at a time when we felt we should not be pushing too much in support, say, of the stock market at this time. That's the comparison you can make between the US and Germany. Germany had far easier lending compared to the US because they ensured that the working class was taken care of. Same with the Nordic countries. So the thing is, these are things difficult to translate immediately here, but we need to understand that among the problems we face now, what the consequences will be is the fact that there is a strong possibility the US will face an implosion because they are now moving from 5.25%, the Fed Chair Jerome Powell mentions that, have agreed to hike. It should be to 5.5%. Yet, if you look at it, the greenback is falling, which means to say they don't actually see this as one that can be sustained. Because the problem you have when then you put on more money in there, buy more dollars, suddenly it crashes. This is a bit like John Major in 1992 making the point, he had taken over from Margaret Thatcher, read my lips, the pound would not fall. Within a month it fell, and fell sharply. People are concerned about that. So my own feeling is we have to track these developments too, because we are a small country, unlike India and China, despite the fact that especially China exports a lot. It's more or less like the US. Imports and exports come to about 10% of the GDP. Imports and exports in gross figures, GDP is in value added. Now, of course, in the case of US, the only economy where it continues to run huge deficits, and yet the dollar is strong because it's the international currency. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. Dr. Chin has one more point to make and then we'll call it a day.
Okay, under this, just I mentioned, the future economic system will be a green economy. Under the green economic system, the green total factor production is very important. Normally we talk about total factor productivity, but under this green economy, you have to add one more word, it's called the green total factor productivity. Then we have to look at first thing we have to look at the energy conservation, which is very important because energy conservation can reduce the carbon emission. Then you have to look at how to upgrade your industry structures to make the structure less carbon emission that will damage our environment. And the third one will be talk about technological innovation. Just now talking about so many like electric vehicles, solar panel, wind power, all these things. All these things will really reduce the carbon emission and will not damage our environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed, ladies and gentlemen. This morning we have traversed from the socio-economic to the geopolitical, from the very technical to the very practical. And thank you very much for your there's one more question. Make it a very quick one because I have to welcome we have to welcome the next panel. Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Jess from Easy Flex. So I have a question to Professor Dr. Chin. According to our understanding of the banking system, it is referred to as a bank credit. So regarding the carbon credit, does it also imply that we can utilize the carbon credit as means to finance electric cars, solar panels, and other similar initiatives? If in this case, that is also imply that carbon credit can be traded. So if it's so, will it introduce a new business model?
Yep, very briefly.
Yes. In these Western countries, they're always talking about how to claim back your carbon credit. That means, just as I mentioned that Malaysia actually can really give tax incentive to our companies in Malaysia. We have to really use something like carbon, how to reduce the carbon emission. Actually, in a way also called how to claim back your carbon credit. That means each company, whenever they make an effort, try to reduce the carbon emission, they will achieve certain credit points. All these credit points can be claimed, in terms of taxation, all these things, so that more companies will be more encouraged to really go and reduce the carbon emission. Because the most effective way, you must give them something for the company, they are more willing to do it. There are two things to really compel a company to really reduce the carbon. First thing, by enforcement or by law. Second thing, give them tax incentive. They got money, got something to claim back, they will really reduce the carbon emission. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think I've overdrawn the time credit. Hopefully you'll get payback during the tea time later. Thank you very much once again. Thank you. And I would like